You don't live here anymore. You have no home with us. That's what my sister Madison said to Marite in front of my parents at the so-called family meeting. She stood up, calm and cold, and placed a cardboard box on the table. Inside were scraps of my life, a framed photo, a sweater, my old planner. No one stopped her. My mom avoided my eyes. My dad just sighed. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply sat there, stunned, realizing I was no longer part of the home I once belonged to. 2 days later, just when I thought I'd finally hit bottom, I got an email. Subject line: "We need to talk. Call immediately." It was from Madison's lawyer. And what I learned next made everything even more twisted than I could have imagined. I should have known something was off the moment Madison texted, "Family meeting. Be on time." Not, "Hey, let's talk," or, "We need to clear the air." Just that cold, clipped sentence. I arrived at the house, the same one. I grew up in 10 minutes early. It was quiet. Too quiet. Mom sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a magazine she clearly wasn't reading. Dad stood by the window with his arms crossed, staring at the driveway like he wished he were anywhere else. And Madison? She was already seated at the head of the table, laptop closed, face unreadable. No one said hi. I sat down slowly, waiting for someone to speak. "Thanks for coming," Madison said flatly. "We wanted to discuss the situation." The way she said situation, like it was a spilled drink, not a human being, was enough to make my stomach churn. She pulled out a manila envelope and placed it in front of her. "We've talked about this, and it's clear this arrangement isn't working. You've overstayed what was supposed to be temporary." I blinked. "Madison, I told you I just needed a few months. I've been applying to jobs every day." "This isn't personal," she interrupted. "Not personal?" I said, my voice rising. "You're literally kicking me out of my own childhood home." That's when she stood up. Calm, composed, like she'd rehearsed it. She walked over to the side cabinet, picked up a small cardboard box, and placed it in front of me. Inside, my toothbrush, a few books, some socks, a notepad with my handwriting on the cover. "You don't live here anymore. You have no home with us," she said, her voice steady and terrifyingly final. I turned to my parents, desperate for some kind of reaction. Mom avoided my eyes, busying herself with her coffee. Dad cleared his throat. "It's probably for the best, Evie," he murmured. "This house isn't good for tension." Tension? I felt the walls closing in. It wasn't just rejection. It was exile. And the worst part? They'd planned it. Together. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the box. I just stood up, holding it like it was full of ashes. "Thanks for the meeting," I said. Then I walked out of the house, out of the family, out of whatever little dignity I thought I had left. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was just the beginning. The thing is, this didn't start at that family meeting. That moment was just the final snap of a rope that had been fraying for years, maybe my whole life. Growing up, Madison was the golden child. She got straight A's, joined every club, never broke curfew. She was polished, confident, the girl who looked like she'd stepped out of a college brochure. And my parents loved it. They bragged about her to friends, framed every one of her certificates, and built their world around her future. Then there was me, Evelyn. The girl who wrote stories in the margins of her textbooks, who forgot homework because she was busy journaling. I wasn't rebellious. I was just different, quiet, dreamy, a little too sensitive for their taste. My mom once said, "You live in your head too much. It's not productive." My dad, more passive, would just sigh when I asked for art supplies or notebooks. They never said I was a disappointment, but I never felt like a point of pride either. The only person who ever truly saw me was Grandpa Walter. He was my mom's dad, and the only person who made me feel like my imagination had value. He'd been a writer himself, never published, but full of stories he'd tell me on our long walks through the neighborhood. "You've got something, Evie," he used to say. "Most people live life on the surface. But you dive deep. Don't ever let them convince you that's a flaw." He gave me my first leather-bound journal for my 10th birthday. I still have it somewhere. He also gave me something no one else in that house ever did: time. While my parents were busy at events or on work calls, Grandpa would sit with me for hours, reading my stories, asking me questions, helping me edit. Madison hated it. She'd walk by and scoff. "Still pretending you're an author?" Grandpa would just smile and say, "Better than pretending you know everything." I think that was the start of the silent war between us. I had his attention, his affection, and she hated that. When he passed away my sophomore year of college, it felt like the last lifeline I had in that house disappeared. Madison gave a perfect eulogy. I couldn't even speak. I just cried. Afterward, she hugged me and whispered, "Guess now you'll finally grow up." She was wrong. I didn't grow up that day. I broke a little. And that crack? It never fully healed. After Grandpa Walter passed, I felt like I was walking through the house with invisible bruises. The kind that don't show, but ache every time someone says, "You should really think about your future." Madison dove straight into law school, just like everyone expected. My parents were ecstatic. Mom would beam at dinner parties. Madison just made Dean's List again. She's going to be a partner by 30. And then they'd turn to me, smiling politely. "Evelyn's writing. Still." Yeah, I was still writing. I'd majored in creative writing, not business, not law, not anything they could use in a family Christmas letter. They never said the words, "mistake," but their silence said plenty. After college, I moved to a small apartment outside Portland. It wasn't glamorous. I shared it with 2 roommates, waited tables at night, and freelanced during the day. But I was writing. I was surviving on my own terms. I remember emailing Mom a short story I got published in a niche literary magazine. She never replied. Weeks later, when I brought it up on a call, she said, "That's nice, dear, but have you thought about something more stable?" The answer was yes. I thought about it all the time. Every time rent was due, every time I skipped groceries to buy printer ink. But giving up felt worse than going broke. Madison, meanwhile, was thriving, graduating with honors, clerking for a federal judge, and getting recruited by a prestigious law firm back in Chicago. She sent perfectly filtered Instagram stories of champagne toasts and polished courtrooms, captioned, "Living the dream." I muted her stories eventually. It hurt too much to compare. Still, I was proud of not asking my family for anything. I made it nearly 5 years on my own. Until everything collapsed. First, the magazine I'd been writing for cut their freelancer budget. Then, my hours at the cafe were reduced. And then came the breakup with a partner I'd lived with for 2 years, who said, "You're always lost in your world, Evelyn. I need someone grounded." Rent was overdue. Savings dried up. I maxed out my credit card trying to keep things afloat. With no options left, I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't. I called home. To my surprise, Madison answered. She sounded civil. Maybe it was because she was busy. Maybe she pitied me. "Either way," she said, "you can come back, temporarily, 3 months, tops." I agreed. I packed my life into 4 suitcases and bought a one-way bus ticket home. I told myself it was just a reset. What I didn't realize was that, to them, I wasn't family coming home. I was a failure returning in shame. And they weren't going to let me forget it. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. When I walked through the front door after all those years, no one hugged me. No one said, "Welcome home." Madison handed me a list instead. "Just a few guidelines while you're here," she said, like it was a dormitory, and she was the RA. "No guests. Be out of common spaces by 10 p.m. Contribute $300 a month toward utilities. Clean your bathroom twice a week. Keep noise down during her Zoom meetings." I blinked at the paper. "You made house rules?" Madison smiled tightly. "This isn't a charity, Evelyn." I wanted to argue, but I was too exhausted. I nodded and dragged my suitcases upstairs to my old bedroom now, a storage space, with boxes stacked against the walls. There was no warmth in that house. No one asked how I was doing. Dad mumbled a hey at dinner. Mom mostly offered backhanded comments like, "I see you're still writing. Maybe you could apply to be a copywriter for Madison's firm?" Madison made it clear that she didn't think I was trying hard enough. Every time I passed her in the kitchen, she'd glance at my laptop and say things like, "Still working on your little blog?" Or worse, "You know, you'd be a lot less stressed if you just got a normal job." The irony was I was trying. I sent out dozens of applications, pitched freelance pieces, even applied to temp jobs. But rejection piled up fast, and living under their roof made every no feel 100 times heavier. To earn some money, I started doing remote editing gigs and helping a small bookstore update their newsletter and social media. When I mentioned it at dinner, Mom wrinkled her nose. "So, marketing for books no one reads?" I bit my tongue. Then came the moment that still stings. I offered to help Madison set up a content strategy for her firm's blog. She'd been struggling to keep up with updates. I had experience, ideas, even mock-up drafts. She stared at my proposal and said, "No offense, Evelyn, but this isn't the kind of thing you can just wing. It's a professional setting." No offense. Always the prelude to an insult. I swallowed the humiliation and said nothing. But something inside me cracked. I realized I wasn't a guest. I was a burden, tolerated only because I was quiet and temporary. Every meal, every moment, every glance felt like I was taking up space I hadn't earned. And even though I was under their roof, I already felt homeless. It started with the thermostat. I had turned it up to 72, was freezing in the house that night. Madison stormed into the living room 20 minutes later, her arms crossed. "Are you kidding me, Evelyn? We don't need to heat the whole house for your comfort." I looked up from my laptop, already bracing for another fight. "It's not like I turned it to 80. It's cold." She scoffed. "This is exactly the problem. You're entitled. You don't think about the bills you're not paying." That line hit hard. I was paying something. I cleaned, I cooked, I worked. But to her, none of that counted. "I'm trying," I said. "You act like I'm some couch surfing parasite. I've applied to more jobs this week than—" "Then what?" she snapped. "Then writing another sad blog post? Evelyn, your life is a series of excuses wrapped in creativity." It was cruel. But worse than her words was the fact that she believed them. I stood up, pulse pounding. "You don't know the first thing about how hard I've worked just to survive." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "Survive? You moved back into a house you didn't contribute to, mooching off people who actually have goals. Don't talk to me about survival." That was it, the final push. "You've hated me since we were kids," I said, voice shaking. "Because Grandpa chose to believe in me instead of you. That's what this has always been about. Not the thermostat, not rent, control, jealousy." Her eyes went wide for a second, just a flicker, but then she shut it down with a smile. "You're delusional. You think this is about Grandpa?" She stepped closer. "I'm done arguing with you. We'll settle this tomorrow." "Settle what?" I asked. "There's going to be a family meeting," she said, walking away. "It's time we make things clear." She didn't say anything else. I sat on the edge of the couch that night, shaking half from rage, half from fear. She'd said it like a warning, like a sentence had already been decided. And deep down, I think I knew something was coming. But not even in my worst-case imaginings did I expect what actually happened. The next morning would change everything. The next morning, the house was spotless. Too spotless. I came downstairs, still groggy, expecting a continuation of last night's argument, awkward silence, maybe a few passive-aggressive comments over burnt toast. But what I walked into was something different, something prepared. The dining table was cleared, except for a single notepad and 3 glasses of water. Madison sat at the head of the table again, dressed like she was about to present in court. My parents flanked her, their faces tight, unreadable. No coffee, no breakfast, no good morning. Just silence and tension so thick I could taste it. "Sit down, Evelyn," Madison said. Her voice was cool, professional, practiced. I sat slowly, heart beginning to thud in my chest. "We've been talking," she began, folding her hands neatly on the table. "And it's become clear that this living arrangement isn't working for anyone." I looked at Mom. She stared at her water glass. Dad rubbed the bridge of his nose, as if exhausted by a conversation that hadn't even started. "This house was meant to be a temporary place for you," Madison continued. "But you've been here for nearly 2 months, and there's been no meaningful progress toward moving forward." "That's not true," I said, my voice trembling. "I've been applying to jobs every day. I've picked up freelance work. I've done everything I said I would." Madison didn't blink. "You've brought tension into the home, you've refused help, and you continue to act like a victim." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Refused help? You mock everything I try to do?" Then she stood. And that's when I saw it. A cardboard box. She walked into the living room, picked it up from behind the couch, and placed it gently on the table in front of me. Inside were my notebooks, a pair of shoes, my phone charger, my toothbrush, my journal. "You don't live here anymore," Madison said. "You have no home with us." The words hit like a punch to the ribs. And what made it worse, what made it unbearable, was the way my parents sat there, silent. Mom blinked rapidly, but said nothing. Dad finally spoke, voice low, distant. "It's for the best, Evelyn." "The best for who?" I whispered. No one answered. I looked down at the box at my life, reduced to a few objects shoved into a container. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw it across the room. I wanted to cry, beg, curse, something. But all I could do was stand. I picked it up slowly. My hands were shaking, but I refused to let them see. "You planned this?" I said quietly. "All of you." Madison didn't even flinch. "We gave you time. You didn't use it." "You never gave me a chance," I snapped. "You gave me conditions, deadlines, shame." No one moved. I walked to the door without another word. My palms were sweating, my throat burned. I felt like I might pass out from the weight of what had just happened. But I didn't stop. Not until I was outside. Not until the door clicked shut behind me. I stood on the porch, holding that stupid box, looking back at the house I had once called home. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be erased. I spent that night at a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind with buzzing fluorescent lights and walls so thin I could hear the couple next door arguing about frozen pizza. I lay on the lumpy mattress, still fully dressed, my arms wrapped around that box like it might disappear if I let go. I couldn't cry. I couldn't even think clearly. It was like my brain had gone numb from too much noise. One thought kept circling. They really did it. They kicked me out. I hadn't checked my phone all day, barely had the battery to. But that night, I connected to the motel's Wi-Fi, hoping for, I don't know, a job offer? A miracle? What I got was something else. Subject line: Walter Hayes Trust. Immediate attention required. From Erica Davis, Associate Attorney, Mason, Hale LLP. At first, I thought it was spam. But the words, Walter Hayes, stopped me cold. I opened the email. "Dear Ms. Evelyn Hayes, we are reaching out regarding a matter related to the estate of your late grandfather, Walter Hayes. A provision in his trust has recently triggered legal review due to your current living circumstances. Please contact our office immediately to discuss next steps." I read it 3 times, my heart pounding louder with each pass. The trust. Grandpa Walter's trust. No one had ever mentioned a trust before, not at the funeral, not in any will reading, not in years of family conversations. It was like he'd been erased along with me. My hands shook as I tapped out a reply, requesting a call the next morning. I barely slept that night, just stared at the ceiling, wondering what he could have possibly left for me. By 9 a.m., I was sitting on a bench outside a coffee shop, phone pressed to my ear, heart in my throat. Erica answered. warm but professional. Evelyn, thank you for getting back to us. We've reviewed the terms of your grandfather's trust. It includes two key provisions. First, a residential property deeded solely in your name, located in Forest Hill. Second, a fund allocated specifically for your creative work. I sat in stunned silence. I'm sorry. What? She repeated it slowly. A house. A fund. Both intended for me. Why now? I asked. Why didn't anyone tell me? Erica hesitated. The trust was designed to remain sealed unless certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was you being removed from your family residence without consent. Once that happened, the trigger activated, and we were notified. Grandpa knew. He'd seen it coming. He knew Madison. He knew my parents. And he knew that one day, I'd need a way out. That night, sitting in the coffee shop parking lot, I looked up at the sky gray, heavy, threatening rain. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel powerless. 1 week later, I held the keys to a small 2-bedroom bungalow tucked beneath towering pines in Forest Hill. It wasn't fancy worn porch steps, peeling paint, but it was quiet. It was mine. My name was on the deed. My signature unlocked the door. No conditions, no curfews, no sister with clipboards and chore charts. Just space. The first night, I slept on the floor with a blanket and a borrowed pillow. The house creaked around me like it was exhaling after years of holding its breath. And I finally did the same. The legal fund Grandpa left me wasn't massive, but it was enough. Enough to fix the leaky roof. Enough to buy a used laptop and a proper desk. Enough to breathe. More importantly, it was enough to write. I launched a blog, raw, unfiltered, unapologetically me. I wrote about shame and silence, and what it's like to be erased by people who are supposed to love you. And to my surprise, people read it. People related. I wasn't alone. I even submitted one of the pieces to a literary journal I'd been too scared to approach before. A month later, I got the email. Accepted. I printed it out and taped it to my fridge. Madison tried to contact me once through a lawyer. A carefully worded letter suggesting we review the terms of the trust and re-establish a cooperative understanding. I didn't respond. There would be no understanding. Not anymore. Mom sent a birthday card with no return address. Inside was a check for $100 and a note. Hope you're okay. I folded it in half and left it on the shelf, untouched. And Dad? Silence. As always. But somehow, I wasn't bitter. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I had stopped trying to belong to them. And started belonging to myself. One morning, as the first snow dusted the windowsill, I pulled out the old journal Grandpa had given me when I was 10. Inside the cover, in faded ink, he'd written, "For Evelyn, may you never write to be accepted, only to be free." I ran my fingers over the words, tears prickling but not from sadness. From truth. I was no longer the girl holding a box on the porch, waiting to be let back in. I was building something better. A life. A home. A voice that no one could evict again.